The moment one gives close attention to anything, even a blade of grass, it becomes a mysterious, awesome, indescribably magnificent world in itself. Henry Miller. So welcome to Module 4, Week 14. We are counting down, my friends. Today is Creating Avenues for Grieving, Part 3. And let's take a moment to turn on our candle or light our candle and create a container for grief. So we're creating this container for grief that ripples out and opens up a space for us to place anything that we don't have control over, and we want to allow it to move and to be held, and we'll allow for this for everybody, for people, us, between us, and everybody else. There's a lot of grief that we want to allow for. So we're allowing this container so it doesn't feel individually overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask everybody to just sit back, maybe close your eyes. Feel yourself sitting on the surface that you're on. Consider that that surface was made to hold you. Originally, it was made to hold someone, and it's made its way to you, and it wants to hold you. That is what it was made for. It's sturdy and it's strong and it's able to hold you. So let yourself be held. Drop down into that surface. And if your feet are on the floor, you can let your feet drop down into the ground, root down into the earth. Connect with that which is below us. Be supported. And in the same way, we can let ourselves be supported by the air. Drop into the air and let it hold us. And at the same time, we can think about the energy running through our midline, pulling up out the top of the head, down through the legs, out the bottom of the feet, and stretching like softening taffy, and inviting the physical body to lengthen, to open up space between the vertebrae that maybe there was contraction. Maybe there's contraction. Now we want to open it up, invite in more space, more breath, more air. And while we're inviting in this lengthening, this energy going through the midline is also pulling out through the shoulders and the ribs and the hips sideways. Inviting in widening. And inviting and widening also with the front body and the back body. So you might start to feel a sense of being expanded and lightened and grounded, tethered to the earth. Like a helium balloon floating up, and then a tethered string down into the center of the earth. And for some of us, this is a ritual. We do this a few times a week. We remember to root down into the earth, to think of our head like a helium balloon lifting and our body as the string hanging down. This ritual brings us back to this understanding. We don't maintain it 100% of the time. And the more we do it, the more we remember to come back to it when needed or when we remember. And also when we do it, the quicker we get there to this place of being expanded and grounded, of being held. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and start bringing your inner vision and outer vision into focus, noticing the inside, how you feel, and the outside surroundings around you. And just look all around you. Look behind you and above and below. Situate yourself in this space, in this time, this body, this time, this space. And I'm very happy to be a helium balloon with you all. And Remy, thank you for showing us how we can just float with that helium balloon. We can just move with it. Let it move us. So last week we talked about healing moves forward and backward. And grieving also moves forward and backward. We talked about how healing a soul wound and grieving now heals and allows grieving for the people who came before us. It heals their presence in our life, their presence in our memory, and the expression of them in our DNA. We talked about how opening more room for flow and compassion inside of us heals the generations to come, because we're not passing on any trauma. We're not passing anything on to anyone ahead of us when we've healed it ourselves. And we also talked last week about how completing an action, how using clean pain and metabolizing, moving through something that's uncomfortable, figuring it out, being brave, knowing that this is something that I have to go through. This feels right. And not running away, not succumbing to the natural desire to fight or flight or freeze, to make a decision to go through clean pain and do our healing. That when we do this, that sometimes we're not just healing something in our own life, that something's been passed down to us and we're healing that which we can't even name, that came down to us through the ages, through the generations, maybe from the Big Bang. So we're simultaneously healing ourselves in the present and the past and the future. So last week we looked back at an ancestor, someone that we didn't know, someone that we didn't choose, someone who just came to us. And mostly we were interested in how we react to them. That's sort of the initial place of healing, is noticing in our body what feels comfortable and uncomfortable, and being able to just sit with that and look at it. And the next question would be maybe, what might they be here for? What are they showing up for? Why are they showing up to me right now? When I invited an ancestor and didn't know who it was going to be, why them? Why this one? Why now? What do they have that they want to be healed? What do they want to tell me? What's going on there? And then looking forward gives us the capacity to know what we're moving toward and how to move in that direction. So if you can imagine a future, your descendants where they are dealing very, very well as a culture, as a society, with stress and trauma and loss and grief. If you can imagine that and tap into them, then they can assist us in knowing, how are we doing right now? What maybe is the next first step that we can do toward getting to that future? And we have more control of how to get there. And we're informed by our ancestors and our descendants. We can't do this work on our own. We're informed by them to work together toward these healing the past and working toward a future that makes more sense, more compassionate, more equity. All right, so I encourage everybody to stand up and breathe and stretch. And you're all muted, so I encourage you to qigong shake or hum. You can make some sound while you're moving and grooving. Anything that's inside, any trauma that's trapped, any stress that's inside, just move it out. And while you decide, if you decide to deal with things that are coming up inside of you that are uncomfortable, and you decide that you want to do clean pain, you want to pay attention to it, remember the 5 anchors, that the last of the 5 anchors is to disperse energy that's left over. So paying attention to our emotions, being with our emotions, staying in the emotions, staying with the body, staying in the present moment, and then shaking out anything that is excess that we we don't want to hold on to while we're dealing with whatever's coming up. Using whatever tools that you can, whatever tools that feel right for you right now. So this week we're going to move into rituals and creating space for grieving. So one of the rituals is what you're doing right now. That's a ritual that we have created, that while we're learning, things are going to come up. We're thinking. And we want to take care of that as it comes up. And I want to encourage everybody to take eye breaks every 20 minutes or so. Look away from the screen or close your eyes for about 20 seconds. And you don't need to look at the screen right now, so you can close your eyes or look away from the screen now. So I want to talk for a moment about creating space for wisdom to enter, for healing to enter, for grief to happen, creating space for the spirit to be part of us, for our ancestors and our descendants to help us, creating space for all of that. And one of the ways that I've learned about creating space is through polyrhythms. I also want to talk about, I learned that in native cultures, a lot of indigenous cultures, when they're doing art, like beadwork, weaving, painting, they leave a space that looks to the ordinary eye like a mistake, but it's an actual space that's left so that spirit can enter, a place for spirit to enter. And so if we think about mistakes or spaciousness between things, you know, the pause between the inhale and the exhale and the exhale and the inhale. If we think about all those places where we can create or allow space, those are places, if you reframe it, it's not a boring waiting, it's not a mistake, it's a space for something to come in that's helpful. And with polyrhythms, when I was learning about drumming, I thought it was super interesting that polyrhythms are 2 different beats that don't come together every single measure. They come together every certain amount of measures, every 3 measures or 5 measures or 7 measures or 13 measures. And in between, when they come together, in between that space that's created, that what I was taught is that the indigenous cultures that do polyrhythms did this on purpose. They wanted to create a space for spirit to come in. So jazz, I find jazz is one of those musical places where polyrhythms exist. And being that I was raised in a home with my dad was into jazz, it tends to be a place, and learning drumming and African drumming also, those are places where I've had the experience of feeling what that feels like to sit in a place that feels uncomfortable and wait for something to open in between the discomfort, those dissonant chords, or those places where it feels like things aren't coming together, to sit through that and wait for it to settle in. And something happens when you just sit with that discomfort, when you sit through it, when things come together and then go apart, come together and go apart. And the pattern isn't something that we're necessarily used to. So I'm going to play for you. Dave Brubeck Quartet it's considered a jazz standard called Take 5. It's now a standard. And originally, this was composed by the saxophonist, whose name is Paul Desmond, and recorded originally by Dave Brubeck Quartet. Dave Brubeck being the piano player. And the drummer is who really holds the polyrhythm more than anybody. The drummer is amazing. If you tune into the drummer, you can hear that it's not a regular 4-beat. It's got a polyrhythm. So Joe Morello is the drummer, and also Eugene Wright is the bassist. So I want you to just listen. Don't need to look at the screen. Just listen. Yeah, Jonas.
I I would just like to mention that is one of my all-time favorite jazz tunes, and it's one that, as a saxophonist, I've spent years studying, and so I really appreciate you sharing this. And I'd also like to mention that I recently, watched a movie on Netflix called Stowaway, and
Mm,
uh, I would recommend watching it purely even just for this one particular scene. And it was one of those scenes that I enjoyed it so much that I rewound it and recorded it on my phone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to upload that clip to our classroom page, because I would recommend us all watching this and really considering it. It talks about jazz, but really it's talking about humanity. Really, it's talking about the tensions and the unresolved conflicts that seem to go off kilter, and yet it's all moving along together. And there is an order to it, even if we don't immediately see it. So I would definitely recommend watching that. I will upload that to the classroom for us. It's only a minute in 40 seconds long, so it's a quick watch, but you'll be thinking about it for days afterwards. So thank you for sharing that, Ami.
thank you, Jonas. Yeah, and I also want to recommend that if anyone wants to go onto YouTube and plug in Take Five with Al Jarreau. Al Jarreau is kind of mind-boggling in the fact that he can vocalize body sounds. You know, way before beatbox was popular, Al Jarreau was doing beatbox. And also he does a version of Take Five that, my body has to move when I hear music. When I watch and hear Al Jarreau doing Take Five, my body goes like kind of mental. It's awesome. So I suggest, if you want to check out Al Jarreau doing Take Five. Also, if you want to come back to these, there's 2.5 hours almost of this um, shamanic healing music that has a lot of polyrhythms, and just putting it on in the background can open our mind so that we're more present and more present to our connection with each other, which is what I think polyrhythmic music does ultimately. Also, if you want to challenge yourself, I would say come to this slide. So this man, Jake Lizio, does this tutorial. It's about 14 minutes long, and he does this tutorial about how to do a 3/4 and a 4/3 polyrhythm, and it's just so logical. To do something really illogical in a logical fashion is a good, I don't know, it's good brain food. It's good for us to try something new, like a language. This is something new. This is a whole new language. Polyrhythms are a whole new language. So if you haven't studied polyrhythms, I would suggest you check this out just for the sake of opening our minds and our beings. It really opens us up in more than one way. Can't explain it. We just got to do it.
When I first discovered
When tea becomes ritual, it takes its place at the heart of our ability to see greatness in small things. Where is beauty to be found? In great things that, like everything else, are doomed to die, or in small things that aspire to nothing? Yet know how to set a jewel of infinity in a single moment. Muriel Barbary. By participating in a ritual, you are being put in accord with the wisdom that is inherent within you. Your consciousness is being reminded of the wisdom of your own life. Joseph Campbell. Rituals, we're going to talk about rituals now. Rituals are actions that symbolically connect us to something meaningful. They're comforting. They help us express feelings. They bring about a sense of closure sometimes, or they keep an important part of the past alive. They honor the person doing them and that which or whom is gone. Rituals can be elaborate or simple. They can take from seconds to hours. They can be formal or spontaneous. I love this, that we've heard of a morning ritual. You wake up and you have a cup of coffee or do exercise or do whatever, shower, whatever your morning ritual is. But what about a MOURN, morning ritual? Could we try that? A morning, MOURN, morning ritual is a symbolic activity that helps us, together with our families and friends, express our deepest thoughts and feelings about life's most important events. Cultures have rituals around death and dying, burying the dead, and mourning and grieving. Within one culture, death rites vary widely by region, culture, class, school, and lineage, and yet common elements prevail, such as in the Lakota culture. Many say those who have died walk on, implying a continuation of a journey. Rituals and ceremonies encourage the spirit into a spirit world, Wakantanka. Ceremonies are led by a trained medicine man or woman who provide guidance for the mourners about proper ways to channel their grief and assistance with the continued journey of the spirit. Buddhist death rites. Death bodies are often dressed and attended by family and friends to honor and guide the deceased, as a means for survivors to acknowledge the separation of the body from the mind at death. Tibet. Relatives keep vigil over the deceased for 4 to 9 days. An adept reads from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Sky burial sometimes happens. And the deceased is expected to take a new birth at the end of 49 days. Jewish mourning. And I think Ali was asking about this yesterday. So for the first 7 days, family and community visit and participate in prayer services. And they're usually held at the home of the person who's grieving, and this is called Shiva. Shaloshim happens either for the first 30 days or 11 months for those who've lost a parent, and mourners are expected to return to their normal routine with restrictions. And it depends on what the death is, what the loss is, what those restrictions are. Mourner's Kaddish is a prayer that's recited daily during Shaloshim, every day, for either 30 days or 11 months. A tombstone or unveiling is often done about a year after the death. And the Yarzeit is the anniversary of the death observed each year. And then the deceased is also remembered 4 times a year during Course services. So if you come back to the slide, you can click on any of these and be taken to find out more about them. Okay? All right. Grief rituals from Mama Lula Christopher, who is an elder in the Dagara tradition of the Burkina Faso, which is in West Africa. She came to Brattleboro and she worked with some folks at the Roots Social Justice Center. Excuse me. And you may want to, in your journal, write down some of these questions and start to think about them. Like, what would it feel like if you had space for your grief? Where do you carry grief in your body? What would happen if you were to let it go? If you could take off parts of your garments of protection, is how she puts it. The great waters of the earth are big and wide enough to hold all of our tears. Which is, I think, a beautiful supportive way of thinking about crying, because in our culture, crying is not so acceptable for everybody. So this is a great way to think of it. The great waters of the earth are big and wide enough to hold all of our tears. What would you lay down if the earth could hold and transform it for you? What would you lay down if the earth could hold and transform it for you? And a lot of us who have gone through some pretty big, heavy grieving realize that on the other side of grief is joy. It's two sides to the same coin. That when we allow ourselves to grieve, we allow ourselves to feel all of our feelings, including joy. It's joyful to be fully alive. And then I love this question that she asked: who will you ancestorize? Who will you gather around your table? Elizabeth Gilbert said, "This is what rituals are for. We do spiritual ceremonies as human beings in order to create a safe resting place for our most complicated feelings of joy or trauma, so that we don't have to haul those feelings around with us forever, weighing us down. We all need such places of ritual safekeeping. And I do believe," she says, "that if your culture or tradition doesn't have the specific ritual you are craving, then you are absolutely permitted to make up a ceremony of your own devising, fixing your own broken down emotional systems, with all the do-it-yourself resourcefulness of a generous plumber or poet." And Carl Jung said, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." So in developing a personally meaningful ritual, we always think about the meaning. What is the meaning of your ritual? We would ask. What would I like it to mean? When and where will the ritual take place? What settings might connect you to the meaning of the ritual? Who will be present? Will having others present enable you to connect more fully to the meaning of your ritual? What will be done? What actions or activities will connect you to the meaning of your ritual? Another way to think about it is developing a personal, meaningful ritual is asking yourself, when and how do you presently grieve? And why don't you take some time now to think about that and maybe jot down, when and how do you presently grieve? Another way to think of this is, when and how do you follow a ritual? How might you create more avenues for grieving? You might think in terms of, when will you allot time to grieve? How will you grieve? What tools or rituals will you use? How might you grieve with others? And finally, think about what will support you to grieve regularly. This feels extremely important to me because I live in a culture where we're not supported to grieve regularly. So we have to create some kind of a support system to help us, each one of us, to follow through on a new way of thinking and doing, a new way of being. If we're going to do something different, like grieve regularly, we're going to need to support each other or find a way to be supported to do that. So think about how will you, what will support you to grieve regularly.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you, everybody, for
Jonas.
sharing.
Great to see
Great.
you.
Love you all.
Kat,
Bye.
good luck
And
with
Thank
everything.
it was a
you.
really great
Bye,
day today,
Remy.
and thanks for being so
Love
Nancy,
you,
great to
caring,
see you
and
again.
Ali.
great to have you
Ami,
back,
thank
Ali. Missed
you.
you.
Bye,
See you
Kat.
soon.
Great to
Bye.
chat about
Love
all
you,
these
Remy.
Bye,
Great to be
Remy. Bye,
together
Jonas.
again.
Bye, Nancy. Bye,
Love you,
Ali.
Richard.
Love you all.
Great to see
Bye.
you.
Goodness.
Good to
Bye.
see you all. Love you. Bye.
Mm.